your favorite public health podcast. We are live on YouTube, Facebook, and audio on your favorite podcast platforms. If you're interested in public health, then this is the space for you. Welcome everybody to True Health Live. We are back again and we have a special guest this strong. I'm so excited to have and invite to the stage Dr. Iheoma Iruka. We met a few weeks ago. Not actually at this point. It was like I saw you. That's what it was. So I attended one of your lectures and your keynote speaking events at a conference here in North Carolina, and I thought that was the information you shared. It like struck me, and I was like, that would be like a really good topic, to talk about racism. And so we started this season 4 of True Health Live on Black mental health. And so we started with women, and we're going to get into men, but today we're going to talk about children, and specifically racism in children, which is really what one of the many topics that Dr. Iruka is an expert on. So I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to let Dr. Iruka introduce herself and talk to us about, just give us an overview of what her work has been in racism in children. And Peace Ani Radio, we see you in the chat. Welcome.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here, Yafe. What an honor. Hi, everybody who's listening in. I am a research professor at UNC Chapel Hill, and my grounding work is that I do things to protect, promote, and preserve the best and health of our children. And so that goes from the kind of research that we do, how we do our research, how do we integrate our sort of African-centered ways of being and healing. What are the policies that really work, not ones that work for everybody, but that really work to address issues of racism, discrimination, poverty. And then what do we also do that we make sure that it gets out to our policymakers, right? Because in the end of it, right, there's various things that happen at local levels, state levels, and national levels. And it's important that the research, our community experts reaches those in power to make the changes necessary. So I do work at UNC under my center called the Equity Research Action Coalition. It really is about a place where we really begin to bring the information about professional and our lived experience to really make sure that our children, particularly Black children, are thriving, because in the end of it, we know that the early years matter. And so I really focus on that young childhood period.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I think let's get into it. So
Yes.
one of the things that really struck me when listening to the talk on racism and youth was about how early young children actually recognize the construct of race. And I was surprised to learn it's around 3 or 4 years old. And it's interestingly enough, after learning that, I started to see more and more, I don't know, maybe because, our phones and everything's listening.
Yes.
And I started to see different things come across my feed on different channels and whatnot, during doing research and whatever with little children. And, they might be funny or cute, but, these are posts with little children actually recognizing race, and saying oh, well, no, you and I are white. And these would be children whose parents probably identify as Black or African American, and they'd be like, oh, we're white, based on complexion and tone.
That's right.
And things like that. And I was like, oh, wow, this is a thing. And then it actually it triggered a memory from when I was younger. Similar things happened in my household. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. You do that. So can you talk a little bit about some of the statistics that are there around how early we see these things?
Yes. So remember, right, and I do a lot of work in the early childhood period, right, which is really from prenatal, say through about age 8 or 10. And so I wanted to understand a lot of brain development, emotion regulation is happening. But when people talk about, oh, kids are too young at the age of 4, 5, or 6, they're too young, they don't know anything about race, I would say no, it's actually even earlier than that, right? So our evidence so far says even that at birth, babies actually look at face of all races, right? But at
Mm-hmm.
age 2 or 3 months, they begin to look more at faces that match the race of their caregiver. So even as early as 3 months, we're starting to see babies making that sort of connection between their caregivers' voices, and they tend to fear
Right.
that face longer, right? So that's at like 3 to 9 months. And then
Mm-hmm.
even children as young as age 2 use race to reason about people's behavior. So again, they begin to sort of say, okay, maybe that tan color or that maybe brownish color is, they're making judgments not based just on your, like you said, your phenotype, your coloration, your color, right? But by
Mm-hmm.
30 months, right? So about 30 months, about when you're about 2.5 years old, most children use race to choose playmates. Remember, children begin to categorize like red color, blue color. They begin to make all that categories. So it's not surprising that by like 2.5 years, they're able to really begin to, you know what, I want my friends who are like this, who resemble like my parents' friends,
Right.
who, yes, right. They begin to make those judgments by 2.5. And then really by about that age 4 and 5, they begin to express some racial prejudice. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when we begin to see where they're starting to sort of make those connections between race and maybe they get that sort of cultural sort of imprinting about, oh, black is bad or white is good, right? They begin to get that at 4 and 5, right? That means they're still in preschool years. And really
Mm-hmm.
by 5, black and sort of Latina children, they begin to show, so black children and Latina children don't really show preferences in racial groups at age 5, but white children at that age begin to become really biased and strongly favor their white group. So that's by age 5. By kindergarten, children show many of the same racial attitudes that adults have.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets more powerful. But many adults, I should just point out, many adults think you should not talk to race about race to children by age 8. So they're at least a good 6 years behind when kids are starting to sort of make connections, begin to
Yeah.
formulate some of those sort of like prejudicial sort of attitudes. So we have to actually start talking about race way earlier than even we as adults think.
Yeah, because I saw an article, like an abstract in an article in Psychological Science from like 2013, that's basically saying the same thing that you just said, is that white children will associate, and I'm sure a lot of this is from what's happening in the home, who their initial or how do we call it, the nuclear unit, that they're
Yes.
within, who they're surrounded, said like they tend to mimic their caregivers. And it talked about like when they're in that school age, like they start to this particular study, I should say, it showed that they associated black or Asian faces with anger and things like that, and a lot of that comes from what they're mimicking. But even before that, one thing I wanted to ask about or like point out was, no, I guess like ask, like in that initial phase, like when we're talking about like the babies, like 2 and 3 months old, some of that is innate, right? Like,
Yes.
I'm just
That's right.
mimicking, like it because it's not connected to
That's
anything external in that way.
that's
It's like I'm just looking at who takes care of me. This is the nurture or nature or whatever. Like I feel comforted.
that's
My
right.
diapers changed. They feed
That's right.
me.
That's
This
right.
is what
Right. There's no judgment in that. That's
Right.
right.
There's no
That's right.
judgment in it. It's
That
like this
okay.
who answers when I when when I
That's right.
cry.
Exactly. Right. They don't have the underlying intent. They haven't linked that whole sort of society negativity
Right.
biases yet. They're just really attending to, those who exactly are meeting their needs, right? They don't have that underlying sort of like judgment and intent behind what they're doing at their young age. But we're talking about really by the age of 3 to 4 and 5, they begin to make those linkages, right, between your racial sort of group and these other things that adults are making even in their world. And I should really point out that yes, right, the home environment has a big important play in that. We know that the school environment has a big important play in that, but society, right? So you can literally get so many messages from society, whether it's like what you see at the grocery store or don't see, what you see at the doctor's office or don't see, right? So a lot of the messages that kids are actually getting, because don't forget, their brain is developing, there's a lot of synapses happening, and so they're
Right.
getting actually a lot of information and they're having to process it. And so we think thoughtfully about it. When kids are getting a lot of information and they have to process it. And if adults aren't part of processing it, then they're going
Mm.
to process it the way most society is going to process it, right? So with all of those sort of like negative, particularly around people of color, Black people especially, they're going to get all that imprint and that all that narrative because it's literally in what we call the water in the, it's literally the water that we're all drinking. It's in the air. So they're going
Yeah.
to get a lot of that sort of attributes around about particular people of color in particular communities.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna pause for a second and just greet the chat. Greetings on the radio, Master Elect Chief Yuya, and Zaya. Welcome, welcome, welcome to everybody.
Welcome.
Anybody that I may have missed, there might be some watchers on YouTube. And Peace House of Yuya. So just resetting the room, we're talking about racism and children, and we have our special guest with us, Dr. Iheoma Iruka, and she specializes in that early childhood development and looking at how race affects youth. And speaking of which, I wanted to like kind of move into behavior. So now that we've like reached that 3, 4, and then they're going into kindergarten, they're going into school, they see what those societal associations are. They're, like you said, they're linking maybe what they have learned at home or from the doctor's office, from TV,
Right,
because so you
right,
you have these experiences, these external experiences even
right.
before you start school. So sometimes schools just reinforcing what was already
That's right.
inputted or input
That's
beforehand.
right.
So like when it comes to, so then when we have that situation, so now we've got this pool where all these young people are in these young minds. What happens or what starts to happen on that psychological level, that psychosocial level, with when it comes to like behavior and how that affects young people of color when who are actually
Yeah,
on the receiving end of
that's
of
right. Yeah, and remember, right? And when we're talking about like in their early years, right? Children are still developing, so like their cognitive skills, they're still developing their language, right? And a lot of what they really have is their behavior, right? So think about a young child when they're frustrated, you want them to sit down and have a conversation, but probably what they're going to do in response is probably show their behavior. It may be that they may start acting up a little bit. They may sort of not obey quote unquote your rules, right? So there may be some of that sort of oppositional behavior. But again, children, because they're children, that's still many times developmentally appropriate, meaning that yes, children, because they are still formulating their full thinking, their language, they only have certain sort of skill sets to lean in on,
yeah,
especially when they're like, I know I'm in this space here and I feel some kind of way, right? Like we as adults really have the language for it. And so kids are having to basically emote how they're feeling. And we have seen, for example, we have a lot of data, right? Especially coming from the Office of Civil Rights in the US Department of Education, where even as young as 3 to 4 years old, children are being suspended, right? So think about a 36-month-old, a 40-month-old. We see that, disproportionately Black children are likely to be suspended or expelled, meaning that they make up about maybe say, let's say about sort of 12 to 15% of sort of early child programs, but they make up nearly 50% of children who are
hmm
being suspended for, one day, but all being expelled, meaning that they're asked to not come back to the
yeah,
early child programs. Again, we say that yes, some kids can be disruptive, but that level of disproportionality based on race and on gender says there's something else awry, right? And so kids can react when they feel like I'm not being treated fairly, I'm not given an opportunity compared to my peers who look like me, who I'm not given the same fair chance. And so they may begin to respond, whether it's actually showing it in terms of physically or even manifestation, right? Where they can show a level of anxiety, show a level of where, they don't want to sort of leave their parents, show a level of even oppositional where they're like, I don't feel comfortable and I don't have a lot of words other than tell you that I don't want to be in this space because
yeah,
this person doesn't treat me as well as they can be, right? So children can show different kinds of sort of the behavioral markers, right? So whether it's behavioral disorders or
yeah,
anxiety, right? So again, we have to make sure that we not look at children's behavior only, but look at what are the antecedents to those behaviors, right? And we know the implicit bias of teachers and adults play a role in children's responses. So if teachers unwillingly, I should really say, don't recognize that they're treating children differently, right? That they view one behavior as, oh, that's a child who's precocious versus that's a child who's being oppositional, right? The same behavior, but on a Black child viewed as oppositional, for the wild child being viewed as precocious, right? When that happens, right, kids can actually begin to react in varied ways, and that can really impact their sense of self, their sense of comfort, right? And then that could actually snowball into other things. And we know it has lifelong consequences when you
Right.
begin to feel like you don't belong. And that's where the whole school to prison pipeline begins, when people begin to sort of internalize that they're not worthy, that they don't matter. And then you can see children begin to disengage, eventually drop out. They drop out, then they're likely to, be in prison and in their lifetime. And so we really need to make sure that we attend to all these issues early, because they do have these long-term consequences that really impacts their emotional, their economic and social sort of well-being over time.
Right. You said something that triggered like a memory. But before I go into any kind of story
Yeah.
time, because I'm curious for that,
Love.
I want to follow up on the behavior part and like how, yeah, they don't have all the same like tools in the bag
Right.
to express what is happening. So they'll emote sometimes. So I did want to kind of go into like there's this, I don't want to say new, but like I see more and more of it, like parents really sitting with youth and working them through like emotional intelligence and
Yes.
teaching how to express themselves so that it is more like this is what I'm feeling, and I'm seeing it more and more. And I don't know, and I should say I don't know if it's the parents teaching them or you've just got these new people coming out able to be like, well, this is what's happening, because we know they will
Yes.
tell us the truth. They have no filter, and they will tell us the
That's
truth
right. That's
sometimes.
right.
They
That's
have
right.
the
Truth
filter
tellers.
too.
We call them truth tellers. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, people, because because the thing is that people think that all you do is pour into children, right? Right, that they have no capacity other than what we as adults give them, right? But I think what we continue to learn about sort of brain development and its connection to sort of body, mind, and spirit is that children, and that's what we learn in early childhood, that children have the ability, especially as like that 3, 4, they begin to could start explaining cause and effect a little bit, right? So if you can begin to say, let's sit down and really talk through even conflict resolution. Let's sit down and talk to, like, if you're having a problem, let's talk through what is the reason and why. What can I do to help you? Are there other ways you can kind of behave versus this way, right? Because the point of it is that you don't need to impugn a child or their character, right? Because they may be having a bad day for various reasons. And so it's important that we sort of address the behavior and not the personhood. And so I
Yeah.
think parents and other adults are realizing, like, right, it doesn't hurt to take a moment to really give children the words, right? That's again another important part, is that the more you give children the words to kind of help them really express what they're really feeling, then we as adults can now actually help walk them through, okay, now I understand what you're feeling. Here are some options. So when they're either in that same space or a similar space, they now have some of the words or even have the emotional sort of capacity to say, you know what, I'm gonna take 5 minutes right here, right? Like I know, like my son, for example, when he's in his classroom and he knows that a particular kid is not his favorite, he's gonna be like, you know what, I'm gonna go over here because I already know it's not gonna go well. So when we're able to really have kids understand that I know when my trigger is gonna happen and I may get in trouble, let me go ahead and park myself over here so that I can be happy and I can enjoy my day, right? So again, and that's through being able to say that your feelings matter. You may not have all the right words, but there are tools to help you begin to, exactly like you said, develop the emotional intelligence. But that takes a little bit of time, a little bit
Mhm.
of patience, and not. And again, children are still going to be children, right? We can't be like, "Oh, I told you this last week, and I don't remember why you don't remember." And it's also to remember that kids need a moment to fully process and be able to use those tools in different ways at different points in time.
Yeah. I'm gonna go over to the chat because I do want to come back to like, like how we find solutions, but not until later. So I'm
Yes,
gonna go to the chat really
yes, we
quick.
got time.
Um, on the radio says that's interesting. I was pretty young when another child called me the N word. Is there an approach to speak with youth so that they don't take ignorant viewpoints?
This is such a great question. So we know that a lot of particularly Black families prepare their children, right? We call it cultural socialization. So it could be things where we sort of make sure that our kids have sort of a positive view of your race, a positive view of your culture, right? So we know that we do a lot of preparation, right? We may remind them, no matter what somebody tells you, you're beautiful, you're smart, you're worthy. We give them a lot of affirmations, as well as make sure that they understand that somebody may not like you because of your skin color or your nose or your hair, but know that you're loved and affirmed. And so we do that and prepare our children to be able to be in those spaces unfairly, of course, but like we talk, have the police conversation. But I think what we also have to do is make sure there's not just the burden is not just on Black families or even
Mhm.
other families of color, that white families have to begin to have these conversations with their kids early on, right? The burden of this issue of racism should not lie solely on the shoulders of Black people, Black communities. It should begin to lie on white families, white communities, because in the end of it, you created the system, right? You created the kind of sort of oppressive sort of spaces that our children are having to swim in. So I would say a way to sort of prepare children, at least Black children, is to again remind them that somebody calls you a name, right? There's many bad names people may call you, and it's important to know that you are always going to be special, right? That your
Mhm.
name is X, Y, and Z, right? That you're always going to be special. And then if somebody says that, it's important that they understand that don't internalize that, right? And that they make sure that they tell an adult, right? Somebody says something bad to you, like whether it's the N word or compares you to a monkey, as happened recently to a friend of mine, a young child in Florida, is to make sure that they are able to make sure that they address that kid like that is not my name. I don't like that. And they tell an adult. If adult cannot handle that, make sure that they tell a parent. And it's important that the parents make sure to really affirm that child and knowing that sometimes it could be a little bit shocking. They don't know how to respond. It's important to remind them again that you did nothing wrong and to remind them who they are, affirm them continuously, right? And then make sure the adults handle that situation and make sure that the kid is made fully whole, right? And made like make sure that they know that they are a full person, deserving of protection, deserving of attention and affirmation, right? So it's important that we prepare our children, but we don't prepare them to the point of where they're literally now anxious about whether they themselves are safe, whether they themselves are important. But it's important that we give them the tools to have words to say, that is not me. I don't care what you just said about me. But so we need to make sure that we have those conversations, but also continue to do daily affirmations, whether through books, whether through songs, whether through storytelling, because we love a good story, right? So we want to make sure we send a positive joyfulness about what it means to be Black, right? Because being Black is special, right? It's magic, it's beautiful. We want to make sure we tell them that so they internalize it completely. So if somebody calls you the N word, a S word, another word, the kid knows I know who I am, and you can't tell me nothing. Okay.
Right. Thanks for that. I also put the link in the chat for anyone who does want to kind of step outside of the anonymous, well, not necessarily anonymous, but the faceless chat. And if you want to come on stage with us, we have someone on LinkedIn. I think it was Danielle Johnson. She said she's definitely experiencing this now with her kindergartner. So Danielle, if you want to come on and share your story, like feel free. The link is in the chat. You can join using the link. Chief US says there have been, and peace, sovereign needs, greetings. Chief US says there have been studies done by the American Psychological Association to show that even the schooling level, let me do this, even the schooling
I,
level for teachers, that university training is racially biased. And, and we do see this also in the medical industries. And I guess
yeah,
this is where
yeah,
we talk about like the systematic or institutional
yeah. That's
racism.
right.
This leads to misdiagnoses based on cultural disregard. And we see that issue happening across the board in many different
Yeah.
industries.
Thank you so much, Chief Yuya. I feel like this is, when you have drank the Kool-Aid, and mind me, I'm one of those, right? I went to, predominantly white institutions. I have gone from, I've been trained completely. Clearly, I got a PhD, right? And so this is where you begin to unlearn and relearn. And part of what you learn is that a lot of, even the ways that we think about achievement, the way we think about sort of reading and all that, a lot of it is really based on sort of white supremacy ideology, right? And so if a
Mhm.
Black child, say, speaks differently, thinks differently, if their skills are about narrative or oral storytelling skills, right, all that is not assessed. And so they're often, say, if you're speaking African American English, you're diagnosed as having a speech language problem. No, you don't. It's just that you're using a standard for white people, right? The same thing we talk about, even BMI, right? The body mass index, right? Again, is based on a particular sort of body type, but mostly white people. And then if you're a person of color, an athlete, especially as I was at Temple University, you're likely gonna be like, well, you're a little bit obese, right? So again, we have to begin to look at the standards, and those standards are baked into the system of education writ large. And so again, it often will obviously position Black people and in some cases other people of color as always less than. There's no space where it's less than. But that means that even things that are African centered, the way that we greet each other, the way that we even tell stories, all of that is not part of sort of the traditional teaching. And so when children, when teachers and adults bump, are teaching Black children, they don't actually leverage and engage in African centered ways of thinking, the way of multiple intelligences. They just assume there's only one way to know, there's only one factual information, and then we're fed sort of all this sort of negative stereotypes and tropes about the African continent and Black people, and that becomes repurposed in how we see Black children's behavior and how we see even the way that they approach learning. And it's always from the deficit, sort of a really harmful perspective, that all it does is continue to sort of systematize sort of this inherent sort of subpersonhood and inherent lack of intelligence, again, eugenics. And so that's all part of sort of that training. But that thing that we know that we have to continue to undo, and then obviously have people relearn real facts and real history.
Right. You made me think of a point regarding culture and like and having our youth. And I don't have any children, but like when I have children, it is I think about like homeschooling. Like since we're talking about like the part about
Yeah.
school, or even like a homeschooling collective, which what a lot
Yes.
of people do. And
Yes.
you do have these movements where people, whether it be because they want to maintain their specific culture, and just have their children in these collectives where they're only being taught either by them or by people who are of the same culture, because then there's not to have you don't have to worry about that affirming. It's going to be there because you're
Right.
surrounded from day one by you. And it doesn't mean that you're not exposed to other people, but it does mean like when you're actually getting that education, you are surrounded by people who are
Yeah.
like-minded. You share the same culture, values, morals,
That's
so
right.
on and so forth. And I do think that
That's right.
there is merit to that,
Yeah,
yeah.
there is actually. I'm doing work. Actually, one of the projects that I do work around is African centered education, and we see sort of a lot. Actually, quite a bit of them are in the south southeast. You have a few in Chicago, right? Like the Shabazz International School, and exactly part of it is saying that you're gonna get white culture. There's no way to avoid it, right? And so there, and really a lot of these African centered schools, even like our freedom schools, is really to make sure at the minimum that you are fully almost inoculated as much as they can, right? You're endowed with sort of the brilliance of Blackness, right? That there is so much they learn about sort of the African history, the Black American history, really from a factual based perspective, right? So that you find joy in who you are as your community, the way that you speak, the way that you walk. There's not this sort of white supremacy judgment about who you are. And so a lot of these African centered schools really, begin to make sure that you are fully like really inoculated, at least in terms of the richness of being Black, right? And the joyfulness of being Black. And so you do see these kind of schools. And part of it is also a place of healing. And, right. And I'm not surprised, right? We know with COVID-19, I mean, there was a lot of obviously people who were forced to be at home, but we also recognize that Black parents in particular, like, oh my goodness, this is what my baby's been dealing with. I know they've been dealing with a lot, but now that they see it, right, how teachers respond to their children, they're like, I cannot witness this on this sort of day to day, see how my child is being treated, police being called on kids, even though they're in Zoom school. And you now have seen a lot of Black parents moving towards homeschooling because they're like, in the end of it, they realize that I have to take the education in my hands because I've seen that you're not actually teaching
Mhm.
my child. You're actually creating more harm on sort of an emotional, psychological level. So you are seeing that movement because now the education system was not built for us, right? And so now they're saying, what can I do to make sure that my kids don't have to unlearn all that negativity? Right, might as well just do it as early as possible.
Yeah. And what about the trainings? I want to really pull on what TVS said. Like the training is racially biased. Like what what is being done to address that? Like, like what are some steps that can be
Yeah,
taken even now for those who won't be doing homeschool and who will be
yeah,
having
yeah,
their children in the public school system or private. At the end of the day, it's not you.
yeah.
So like what are the
That's
things
right.
that can be done to address that training that teachers are getting that is racially biased?
So I feel like there's several things, right? So one is that a lot of times teachers are not sort of even taught about what is racism. They're not taught about what is implicit bias. They're not thought about like what is sort of culturally sustaining practices. What does it mean to be sort of Black in America? Like, what does that all that mean? So, right, a lot of the teacher training doesn't get into that detail about even how do you engage in a respectful manner with parents, particularly parents that may not look like you, sound like you, have the same sort of world ideology as you, right? So I think a lot of it has to do with all of that, right? So even the standards of education, if you think about it, it's pretty much quote unquote colorblind. But a lot, if you look at our history books, they really are from a particular point of view, right? They
Are
often start with white people are the ones that started everything, and that is literally not true, right? A lot of the from math to history to philosophy, a lot of that started in the continent of Africa, right? So even by the nature of training, that means that you have to actually literally strip away all of the basic teachings we learned even in high school. But I think part of
mm-hmm.
what I would say in terms of training teachers is to make sure that we really look at what is the standards that they're using. Are we doing anything around sort of how do you promote a healthy racial identity? How do you promote sort of inclusive languages that children use? How do we promote sort of factual history? How do we promote how children learn? How do we sort of think about how implicit bias may plays out? Talk about the impact of racism and discrimination on the lives of children, families, and communities, right? So even being able to say, let's make sure that at least they have some basic knowledge in that, right? The other
Yeah.
is also about what kind of assessments are being used to judge children, right? We can argue that she may get to the cows come home, but even the standards of what children know and learn, we need to look at those assessment tools, right? Are they actually culturally relevant? Are they more actually sort of a way to continue to sort of perpetuate sort of biases and inherent deficits, right? And then even the practicum side, right? You want teachers to get training on the ground experiences. We want to make sure, are they getting training during their whole entire sort of training period with those that look like our kids? Who's supervising them? Who's giving them who's judging them? Who's coaching them over time, right? So do they have coaches when they finish their degree, and when they're doing, when they finish their degree, do they have coaching that can help to make sure that as they enter the teaching profession, that they're doing in a way that is not harmful to children, that the information that they're sharing is actually culturally relevant and sustaining, right? So, and it's also anti-bias and anti-racist, right? So there are things that we can do, pre-service before they actually teach kids, and in service when they're teaching kids. But that requires a system level change that I think will take a lot of advocacy from parents saying, look, we don't like what you're teaching our kids. Think about what they're doing over with the whole book ban and all the curriculum. Three white parents say, oh, I don't like my kids, feeling like they're getting blamed and crying in tears. But we also need to make sure that our parents are being heard about. We want our children to learn about real American history that includes Black history. We want our children and teachers to learn about what is implicit bias and how it affects how they respond to our children. We want them to engage in restorative justice practices that doesn't punitize our children. So I think there's many things that we can do. But again, we have to lean in on also white parents, also saying that we want teachers who are also diverse, but also have diverse experiences that are really healing and not harmful. So in the end of it, it's really a long, systematic process that's not going to be like, get this training and you're good to go.
Yeah, and yeah, it will never be something that's overnight. But I think, when it comes to like the will to do something, then it can happen faster than,
That's right.
than
I agree.
necessary. You know? Sovereign Eats says that is and I'm behind on comments. So Sovereign Eats, feel free to clarify because I don't know, I can't remember where we were when this comment came in. That
Yeah.
is the crazy idea of tabula rasa. It negates the child's natural intelligence and their understanding of what they need. I think we were talking about the how they don't, it was, you were answering about the negative viewpoints. I think, but Sovereign
But
Eats,
but
but
yeah,
go
sorry. I
ahead.
mean, sorry, East. I feel like your point is exactly right. Like the children are not, and I was saying also that children, they're not just there for you to pour all this intelligence into them, right? That children actually, right, they are already developing. There's already a lot of development happening in preconception, excuse me, right? And so they're entering the world where now they're also going to get more experiences, right? The neurons and synapses are kind of connecting, and so there are natural things that children already know, right? Their curiosity is part of them developing sort of this thinking about how do I make connections, cause and effect. So kids have the ability to think, right? And sometimes we treat them as you don't know anything to I tell you what you should know, right? And so it's important that we also, and I think to Sarah East's point is that children do have a lot of intelligences. They may not have all the communication skills right away to talk to us, right? But think about babies. They're communicating with us as soon as they wake up, right? As soon as they're out of the womb, they're like, I'm hungry. I'm tired. They're communicating in many, many ways with their body. And sometimes we pick it up and sometimes we don't. And they're sharing things with us. The question is whether we can feel fully, see them. And so, like with children, their behavior, they know what they're feeling, they know what they're seeing. They're reacting with the communication tool they currently have. And so it may not seem appropriate to us, the adults, but no, but they're telling us this environment is not good for me, mommy and daddy, family, right? They're telling us I don't like to be here. So their reaction is actually a form of intelligence that we have to actually honor and make sure that we give them time to tell us, giving me a little, tell us what is it that's not working for you. Find a way to kind of communicate with them because it's a lot that they know and feel, but they may not have all the words to completely communicate.
Right, right. Thank you so much for that answer. Oh, she also says, how does the question, how do we
Mm.
prepare educators adequately to engage with melanin dominant children who are confident? That is a really good point because
Confident.
this is not the child that is, that is okay. Well, they're a
Mm,
little bit wild, like while Mary Sue might be precocious,
that's right.
um, Deshaun is, misbehaving. No, Deshaun may just be confident, So
Right.
how do they adequately engage with them and to, for those who know who they are and understand their emotions, that, those are the ones
Yeah.
who are emotionally intelligent and can probably say, no, this is what's going on because they do exist.
Yes, yes. Like I have two kids, and one of them is that I think we have to begin to allow teachers to say that yes, you may be the adult in the room, right? But that you don't have to be the only ego in the room, right? That you are the
Right.
the supreme Lord leader. And there are some actually approaches, like early childhood approaches, that really emphasize that teachers are facilitating children's learning. They're like children actually, like for example, Montessori is one of those sort of models where teachers are trained to actually observe children, right? They're like, observe the child, give them toys and materials that really fits their hands, that really helps to promote their curiosity, their engagement. And teachers in that kind of model are really trained to say, do observation and really be a facilitator to their learning, right? There are things that kids may want to do and not do, but that requires that teachers are able to say, I'm not the only person who has a thought, who has a particular idea here. I can actually create space for children to help to guide the curriculum development, to help guide the assessment, to help guide what's being learned, because children have the ability to help generate the curriculum. And so I think the more we can prepare teachers to say, you don't have to be on 24/7. You actually can make sure that children have the space to be part of leading the conversation, leading the
Yeah.
sort of the learning, asking the question about what do you want to do today? Tell me what would be a way to really help to support you and support your peers. Do you want to guide a lesson? Do you want to help your peers learn a lesson? Right. So I
Mhm.
think there's certain teaching approaches that really do honor the child's intelligence, that also helps the teacher know that you don't have to be sort of this person in the front of the room just teaching and spitting all this information out. But when you can create space for children to sort of explore and learn, we may be better off. Kids actually know more than we give them credit for, as we say.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. On the radio also says thank you for your answer as well. Master Menelik says, speaking of having already drunk the Kool-Aid, there's a lot of colorism ingrained in the culture where I'm from, the Caribbean. Do you
Mhm.
find that these erroneous ideas are more present and concentrated based on the particular country or culture a person is from?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say that if you think about it, right, we in the U.S. here we talk a lot about racism, but often most of us would say that the grandfather father of it all is really colonialism. And if you
Mhm.
remember, like the Caribbeans, it just means that some people were dropped off early. And so, to me, I would still argue there's a level of colorism that exists. People think, for example, Hispanic people, they don't have those issues. They literally every single continent has those issues around
Yeah.
colorism. If you look at any continent, the darker you are, the likelihood that you're going to be sort of in the subjugated caste, right? To think about Isabel Wilkinson, there's a stratification in the caste system, and a lot of times, if you're darker skin on the phenotype level, you're often in a lower class. And so, I'm not sure I can say that it's concentrated in particular countries or culture. I think that because it literally has been colonized and it's part of literally the whole fabric of our global society, that it may not be as inherently bad in some places, but I would argue that there's no place I have been where it does not exist, right? Whether you go to Latin America, the Caribbean, whether you're talking about the British Virgin Islands, or the Caribbean American versions, or even the continent of Africa, right? We have so many versions of the same thing, of stratification, really based on your phenotype. I think the way we may talk about it may be different. It may not be, we may talk about it in a different way, but there's a level of that in many, many ways. And part of it has always been that the closer you are to white or whiteness, whether in your skin color, whether in the way you approach things, whether in the way you speak, the more you're closer to whiteness, to English speaking, right? You're viewed as better. You get more access and more advantage. And so I think the Caribbean has, of course, they have different versions, but I would argue it's literally everywhere. And so you can see people from the Caribbean who may come to the States, who they get socialized completely, because they've already been drinking the same Kool-Aid, as you say, in terms of
Mhm.
this idea of supremacy, again, based on phenotype, right? Your hair texture, your nose, your features is literally baked into it. Even if we think that it doesn't exist, you'll probably recognize that it probably exists. Look at your television personalities. Do they look more fair skinned? Do they have different kinds of hair texture? Do they have even different kinds of ways they speak? Again, I
Mm,
think when we look around the globe, we'll see that it has the whole idea of colonialism has really been transported throughout the globe.
yeah, I would, not to change the subject, but like, on that same topic of like the colorism, because it does show like how those things progress as one transitions into adulthood. But at a point there was, the natural hair movement, right, was so prevalent on social media, and then it became, and it's not as, it's still there, but it's not as like boom boom as it was before. I don't know what boom boom is, but like you guys can enjoy.
I know what you mean.
um,
Yes.
but there was that whole argument that the those who were getting more accolades or going viral or getting more followers or being more watched were those that had a specific phenotype and a specific hair grade. And so those are just like, that's just like one tiny peek
Yeah.
into how that racism and how like, and all the small subsets
Yeah.
underneath that we buy into, right? Because I do want to acknowledge, like, it's a construct, and it's a lot of these things everybody's buying into, even the ones who are on the receiving end. We're all buying into it, and so these things, continue to happen in all these different arenas. And that was just that
Yeah.
just came to mind as you were talking, and like talking about like the colorism and how that like affects people.
Yeah.
And it's like it happens everywhere,
Yeah.
and in
Yeah.
many different, it rears its ugly head in
Yeah.
many different. Yeah.
And our kids receive that message. You may never talk directly to a kid and say, I think, being fair skinned, or this hair texture, is better. What you never probably say those words ever. Black people, we never say those words, right?
Uh-huh.
But what they either see our reaction, they see who's getting accolades, who is being more likely to be mistreated. Again, even thinking about our entertainers, right? Who's likely to sort of get the megaphone versus who's like really, really amazing, but they're like, right? So our kids do get that information. And again, they tuck it into their cabinets, called their brain, and then they begin to make those connections about, oh, that's who's most valuable. Oh, that's who's most liked. So it just is like, again, kids are scientists, as one of my good colleagues talks about, and they soak it in whether or not we intend to or not. They get the message.
Yeah. And I want us to go into like the mental health piece, like how that starts,
Yeah,
what long-term effects we see,
yeah,
but I'm not gonna ignore everybody's questions. So Master me like also says there's a saying in teacher training that you should be,
yeah.
quote, the guide on the side, not the sage on. Ooh, I never heard that
Yes,
before.
yes,
The
I have,
sage
yes.
on the stage in order to help students to take more responsibility over their learning experience. So
That's right.
it's just a comment, but
That's
if
right.
you want to talk to
Yeah.
that, like, please feel
Yeah,
free.
that's literally exactly like the Montessori model, for example. Again, there's other models like that, even African American teaching, right? That's literally how they sort of think about it. At least the way when I've seen it done really well is exactly that. That they're like, you are not exactly the sage on the stage, right? You're really a facilitator, helping to sort of help children explore their learning, and they get to create their learning in different ways. And you see this in the way that they generate the curriculum. They have projects that part of the learning is really about what kids are learning through different media and different experiences. Unlike a lot of our public school system, that's really about, okay, here's the material, fill out this bubble sheet, let me let you know what I know, let me spit this stuff out at you, and you spit it back at me, and we're good to go, right? As opposed
Mm-hmm.
to a level of like higher order thinking, inquiry, project-based experiences, bring it back to the class, let's have conversations, right? So you can see that the different kinds of approaches tells you whether children's thoughts and ideas are valued, or whether we're like, we just need to make sure that you know how to read and know how to do some and fill up the bubble sheets.
Right. And you know what? Like, even taking that further, like, and we see this, like, I see this like as an adjunct, like, you know, that kind of using, you just get used to being pushed along. So that idea like motivation and discipline, or that balance between motivation and discipline, isn't necessarily there. And so when you get to a certain point, the um the motivation there, you really be able to do it. You also have taught what discipline looks like, and that's like a whole other like topic. But like, even we're talking about like the stage bodying that, like, you kind of just push through, and they're not really learning how to do things, or how to be disciplined, how to be motivated, you know, in a really balanced way. So, um, and they have to evolve the systems we have in place now. I don't remember what we were talking about, but thank you. Um, Also, Yuya says, I agree. Our children are much more intelligent than some adults think. Yeah, and I think we see that sometimes. It's like, yeah, you can hear, that phrase you say, you can hear before. Been here before. And yeah, we were glitching back. Okay, so I think we got through all the comments. So I did want to.
Oh yeah, but you're breaking up a little bit, just so you know. There's a little bit of, I don't know
Oh,
if it's me or
it's me. No, I thought it was you. Glitchy. It's me.
okay, maybe it's me.
Okay.
Okay.
No, it probably is. Oh, let's see. We still got internet. We do. Okay. So,
Yeah,
can you still hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah,
Okay.
you just come in
So
now.
I wanted to. Okay, perfect. I think we're good on the.
Okay, good.
We're still live. I think we're good. We're glitchy. I think, yeah, we're kind of glitchy, and it looks like, let's see. Yeah, we're glitchy. I think we're frozen on the front end. If you guys can hear me, like, just put like a one. Yes, we're breaking up badly. Oh no. Oh,
Okay, I can
let's
hear
see if
you.
we
Yeah,
can fix
I can hear
this.
you. Yeah.
Okay, we still got internet. Oh wow. Okay. I don't know. Can you hear me now? Can you see
I
me?
can hear you. I can hear you. Yeah, I can
Okay,
hear
okay.
you. Yeah.
Okay, so Dr. Iruka is glitchy, so we'll see if we can add the stage. I don't know, Dr. Iruka, if you can hear me, try coming off and
Okay.
like going off and coming back. Fine. No, you don't have to put zero. Yeah. But if you can't hear me now, just please put one. I see like, okay, you're back, but I'm not sure if it's still
Okay,
glitchy
let me
or
see.
not.
All right, you're
Um, So
I'm gonna
let
hop.
me know. And then
Okay.
once, uh, okay, perfect.
Can
I
you
think she's back. Okay. Can you see me and hear me, Dr. Ruka?
I can see you. I can hear you.
Yeah, we can make out what you're saying now. It's just my video. I'm not sure like what is happening today. This is a conversation we're getting good. The internet, the internet is just like no stop.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Okay, I think we're back. Can you see me and hear me? I can see you.
So I think people can see me and hear me, and I think you're coming a little glitchy and not as clear. I think that's what I'm reading in the chat.
Oh
Yeah,
no,
but yeah,
just my video.
I can see you making a face. Maybe I should just take over hosting, Judy. And you guys have questions? No, I'm kidding. We don't want to start without our dear host. Yeah, I know your mouth is moving, Yappy, but I don't. Your mouth is moving, but I don't see. I can't hear you. Can you hear me? I know, like it's uh, I'd like you to be frozen. Oh, okay. So somebody has asked me, can I share a little bit about ERS in the meantime? And when you mean ERS, confirm, do you mean ethnic racial socialization? To be sure, a new radio, is that what you mean by ERS? I want to make sure I have all the right acronyms here. If you tell me yes, then I can continue. Um, so if I'm assuming ERS, we're talking about ethnic racial socialization. So they're really practices that really you use to make sure that children recognize, or at least youth recognize, um, really that sort of that cultural upbringing in a positive, healthy way. Oh, environmental rating scale. Okay, okay, that one. See, this is why ERS I can confirm. Yafi, can you hear us? So the ERS Environment Rating Scale is a scale that was developed in a UNC Chapel Hill with colleagues, and is really trying to measure the quality of the learning environment for young children. You can see in a lot of state rating systems and a lot of program rating systems. And so the work I've been doing has been trying to look at to what extent is it bias free, right? To what extent? Because what we see sometimes with some of these measures is that Black teachers, especially, or classrooms with mostly or a lot of Black children, are rated as low quality. And so we're trying to examine to what extent is this tool bias free and how can we improve upon it? Because at the end of it, we want to be able to make sure that our children are in environments that are healthy, that are healing, and that we can use the tool to help teachers also improve their practices, right? In terms of how they create rich and learn environments for young children. Debbie, can you hear us now? I can see
I
you.
can't. I don't know what happened. I think it was something was just like, no, we're gonna take you off now. It was just,
Yeah.
I don't know. But I can hear
Okay.
you and see you, and I
Good.
think I can be seen and heard. But I saw like the question about ERS. So let me
Yes.
not interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, I was just explaining, and yeah, and I would just tell you too, Yafi, like your video is not as crystal clear, but I think we can hear you, which is more important. But
Okay.
I was just explaining about the environment rating scale because in the end of it, you can't improve what you don't know, and so the environment rating scale is a tool that a lot of states and programs, early child programs, use to kind of gauge the quality of interactions, the quality of the environment, and they use that to make sure that children are at least getting quality learning environments. Oh, did I lose you again, Yafi? You might have lost her again. Oh no.
Great. So okay, I think I can be
Okay.
seen and heard. We
Okay.
switched over the Wi-Fi. I
Yes.
think that's been the issue.
Yes. Yes. Okay. You're back. We are the
Like,
hostess with the
you know what
mostest.
that's like?
We need you. Yes. Yes.
It was like the Wi-Fi was like, remember me? Remember? You got to switch me back.
There you go. See, and now you're back. Okay.
Okay, so now we're back. So I did want to, before we like wrapped it up, like kind of talking to kind of move into the, oh, thank you everyone. Thank you for the ones. Thank you. I could not I felt the problem was on my end. It was definitely my end.
No,
I figured it out.
no, all good.
The mental health piece, right? Because this is really ultimately about mental health. So how does the issue of racism, or how children experience racism, or even take on that generational buying into the construct of racism, affect their mental health as they grow and get older? Like, what are some of the ways that we see that exhibited in, teens, and then as they get into young adulthood and adulthood?
Yeah, there's so many ways that we respond to trauma, right? We just know, like, if you experience sort of any kind of trauma in early childhood, we call it ACEs, so adverse child experiences, right? And so it could take things like whether if you experience abusive, adult, or somebody who may have been incarcerated or been neglected, right? Living in poverty, deep poverty, all that kind of stuff, right? We know that there's evidence we experience that early in your lifetime that really predicts what, like, your health outcomes, right? Whether you're going to get sort of diabetes or other kinds of heart conditions, etc. So we do know that whatever happens in your early years could potentially set you up for these sort of health challenges, again, whether it be mental challenges but also physical challenges. So it's important that we at least recognize there's a relationship between your early child experiences and your later outcomes in life. But what I will say is that, in many ways, I would say we know, at least especially from public health, that a lot of those the interactions that children have, but also the interactions that their family members have, right? We talk about like vicarious racism. Seeing people who look like you, who may look like your the male adults in your household, or the female adults in your household, be
Mhm.
mistreated,
Yeah.
actually imprints on your brain and imprints
Uh,
in you that you kind of have this kind of vulnerable, precarious kind of living. And that really begins to say that I don't have my own life in my own hands, that I am vulnerable. And so as you get sort of into adolescent, right, you may begin to sort of engage more risky behavior. But then it's also how society treats you and sort of treat you. As we are we know that a lot of Black youth are treated as older with more adult intention than they actually have. So if you're a 12-year-old sort of child, Black youth, right, you're treated like you're 18, 16, 18, like you have all this intention. And we know all that eventually begins to impact you, sort of your risk-taking behaviors, your engagement or disengagement from school. And then obviously as you get older, you may become, become more risky in terms of even like your health practices, how you may engage in health promoting practices. And that really could position you to have poorer health, right? So we know that across the life course, that when racism in many forms, whether through lack of access to resources, whether again economic resources or mental health or physical health resources, the less access you have to that, then your all the preventative things that we can do, right, is not available. That means that you continue to take that with you, right? It's basically you take that baggage, you add more on top of it, it gets compounded, and just like the national debt, when it gets compounded, eventually the rent is going to be due, right? And
mhm.
what ends up happening is that something's going to have to give. And so we do know that over time the impact of those early child experiences begin to compound over time and could really have detrimental consequences. For example, we're starting to see a higher rise in suicide with
Right.
our sort of young Black children.
Yeah.
Suicide was never the thing in the Black community. Like,
It was.
let's all be clear about that. But
It
the
was.
fact that we're seeing a higher risk than what has been tells us that there are a lot of messages that our kids are getting, especially online, right? The places that they're starting to engage, the kind of things that they're getting, messages about who they are, messages about their people, die, all these. So I mean, think about even Angel Reese, from LSU, who's not in the WNBA, talked about as soon as she won the championship, the kind of messages she was getting.
Mhm.
Imagine our youth being in sort of these unregulated social media sort of platforms and the kind of comment sections that is so detrimental to your health, right? That they're getting it so literally at the tip of their fingertips. They're getting comments from their peers at school through social media. They get it all the time from people they've never seen. And imagine when you're going through such a sort of that period of development, you're
Yeah.
hormonal, you don't know who you are, you're trying to figure out your identity. that could have detrimental consequences. So it's
Mhm.
not a surprise that we're seeing a higher rate of suicides in our youth. And on top of that, the sort of clinicians who could be culturally responsive are not even available. They're not there. The ones that we have are overworked. So there's a whole sort of things coming together to impact the mental health of our, particularly of our youth, and obviously our early adulthood, who were experiencing sort of some significant things from obviously COVID-19, climate change, inflation, poverty. There's so many things. And I would say part of it is really not having access, not having opportunity, the social media and many other kinds of messaging they're getting about their worth in life, not getting an opportunity to even go to college if they want to, being able to get the jobs because people don't want to hire you because your name sounds a particular way. So there's a lot of compounding things that's impacting our young children, and then continues to unfold and impact them more as they become adolescents, young adult, and so on and so forth. So we have to pay attention to the mental health of our youth, but we that means that we need resources and individuals that have the skill sets to help us in a culturally affirming way. Just because you got a clinician degree does not mean you understand what our youth and young people are dealing with, right? And if the more we don't have sort of culturally relevant resources and practitioners, we're
Mhm.
not going to be able to really help support their healthy development. So this to me
Yeah.
is a crisis in many ways.
Yeah, I think relevant and responsible. Like that's one of the things that we learned, that has been talked about in public health for like the
Right.
longest,
Yeah.
like as far as I can remember.
Yeah.
Like even before there was this push for DEI, like when we talked about health equity, it was like they need to be relevant and responsible.
Yes.
But it's not just like, okay, well, let's fill this quota. Like, are you really speaking to the people in a way that they
Right.
do feel like they can trust you? Because it's
That's
like
right.
said, like it goes into in many different ways, similar to the question asked before about the training of teachers.
That's
Similar
right.
things
So
happen and still happen in the medical field, which we'll
that's
get
right.
to, you know. And so it's like, you're okay, you'll be all right. And so that kind of goes into the trust issue. Like how many times, and it still exists, that we know
Yep.
that melon dominant people have trust issues with the healthcare system. Even as a person who's in public health, I have issues
Yes.
with the healthcare
Me
system.
too.
I have been on that
That's
side
right.
where it's, oh well, it's just this, it's all right, and
Yep.
I, like, and so it's just like, well, dang, like, well, I guess it's okay, like you're the doctor, but and then coming to
Right.
find out, like as I got older, it's like, no, it's not okay. It's
It's
not
not.
okay, but it's like, but who do you go to? So that then has to compel us to like learn more about our own bodies and like what
Right.
we need versus what we don't need, and not like being reliant on
That's
someone
right.
who has no interest, because they don't have to
Right.
look like us, but if you have no interest in well-being, then I
That's
don't
right.
have to rely on you. It also is related to, we talk about like that trust coming from things like the Tuskegee experiments. Those
Yep.
things still exist because in
That's right.
some in smaller ways they're still happening.
Yep.
That whole "you'll be okay" is like because you've been conditioned to think that I'm
That's right.
okay and
That's
I'm
right.
not okay.
That's right. It's all baked into the system of training, right? Where they think that they still, even those who went through medical school, still think that Black people have an extra bone. So that means that we can take pain, right? They're like, you don't need this pain medication. Go sit down somewhere, right? So this is why we still have the maternal mortality crisis, because again, they don't believe who we are. They don't believe in our humanity, and so I think the medical system, clinical system. I think your point about being responsive and culture relevant is one. And remember, all skin folk and kin folk, right? So again, it's really that you want to have diversity. We want to make sure the quality of care is really meeting our cultural well-being and understand the kind of context that we're living in, right? And then that means that they have to know who we are and what we've gone through as a community and the social conditions that we're living in.
Yeah, I would say that again for the people in the back about the.
Yeah, that's right. We just got to remember that. Like we see it all the time, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah,
That's right.
and because sometimes we are our own worst enemies. We treat each other the worst
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
in situations because we're trying to maintain that proximity, right?
that, that's
So
right. That's right.
let's be
That's right.
honest. Let's be honest about it. Honor Radio says, I know, I think the music is a factor too. I think that was when I was still coming
Yeah.
in from the glitchy.
Yes. Well, media it does, but that's media takes many forms. And I think music, art, movies, all of that communicate to our children. Even cartoons that they see, they all communicate in ways that our children receive it, and those messages are again imprinted in their mind. And it takes you, and it's the things that it's hard to break those biases. It's hard to break when you've been sort of drinking that Kool-Aid. It is hard to break that without some clear, intentional, long-term intervention, right? So again, yeah, it's all baked in there.
Yeah, this is where you have to like reverse course, and some
Yeah,
of it you'll need to brainwash. Brainwash from the programming that we received from
yeah,
since we touched on shores here. For those who are
that's right.
descendants of,
That's
because some
right.
of us
Play
here.
people. That's right.
Um, she also says trap music. Trap is I got that one. Trap is a very low vibration, and many of the
Mm,
songs are about
mm,
killing another
mm.
or yourself. Yeah, let me. You
Yeah.
know what? I don't know if this is no. You know what? Me. Go ahead. You go ahead and respond because I was like,
You know, I mean, I want to make sure, like, look, I appreciate different ways of communicating, right? And music is one of the ways that we communicate deeply with each other. And I
Mhm.
can't speak to like trap music. I haven't studied it enough to know, right? And but I do think that we have to take some responsibility for the kind of information our children are getting, right, about whether it's sexism, homophobia, all the above, right, is that we are sort of creating sort of these subcultures in our culture that may be actually creating more harm. Again, some people, look, people, music is artists, people do their thing, but I do think we have to continue to monitor some of our artistic expression to make sure that we're not, we may be lining your own pocket, but you harming the culture more. And I think that's for us to continue to discuss as a community, is that, where does it lie in terms of accountability, right? Where do we say, look, there's accountability if you're actually harming our people, especially during the youth, right? When I'm telling you that they're vulnerable, right? They're going through hormonal changes. They take a lot of things in heart, and that we have high suicidal rates, all this stuff. If they're getting messages of this sort of harmful nature during those times, we need to say that again, we can't say causality. That's why I want to be careful. I want to say they're causing this. Remember when they were burning sort of various NWA music and all that, right? But we want to be careful. We're not saying it's causality, but we want to make sure that we're not adding more flame to the fire, right? And be thoughtful about sort of how we sort of are able to express ourselves without harming our people and our culture.
Yeah, and I was like, I needed to get my words together because I agree with Anu Radio. Like, there's music, like, and not just trap. Like, we have to be mindful of the lyrics that are being spit out, right? Because yes, a lot of times these songs about killing people, killing, or and whether it's about narcotics that you sell to the people that look like you and
Yeah.
praising it, and and for those of you who know, like, I am Anu, and we in our New Life Global Ministries, we have study sessions, and I think the most recent study session, which you can find on the our New Life Global Ministries YouTube channel, one of the parts of the study session talked about music and how, like, a lot of the times it's like, well, do you even know what they're saying? And I'm paraphrasing. Do you know what they're saying? It's like, I don't know, I just like the beat.
Like
But
beats.
what is actually
Yeah.
being imputed into you, because this beat is nice, and somebody who's at the top knew what they were doing. They're feeding you the
Yeah.
garbage, but it's on a nice beat. Like, how many times does that happen? Like,
Yeah.
today, I actually had to stop myself from because we put things on social media, and like when you try to promote, it's like, all right, let me use a trending sound. But
Yeah.
this is a year of consecration, for our house
Mm,
and it was like, no, let's be responsible, because
yeah.
and it was like, well, you know what, let me see the lyrics of this song. And it was in a language that I do not speak, and it was like, well, let me see if there's a way that I could find the lyrics. And the lyrics didn't even make no sense. It was
Mm,
about drinking and being drunk, and I was like, everybody and their mama dancing to
okay.
this song. Like, what
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
what is happening here?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Give me
okay.
some. Give me a story. Uplift my community. Tell me
Yeah, I was
something.
like,
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
people even know what's
Probably
being
not.
said here? And then
Probably
everybody's
not.
putting out videos like dancing to this song. I was like, okay, maybe not. But but that's that was kind of what I was like. I don't even know how to get this out. So many thoughts came to my head. They
Yeah.
won't
I
try
can
to
see
come
that.
out at once. But like, yeah, like the
Yeah.
things that are
Yeah.
low vibrational, those are the
Mm,
ways that we have to stop, like, what's happening as well. Like, if it, like you said, if it doesn't uplift them,
Yeah.
then it really has no place. It has no need for it. Um,
But you know what it makes me think too, what it makes me think is that there are clearly things that people know about our culture, right? Like the low vibration you just talked about, that they know really connects to like our deeper soul. And so in some ways they're almost taking what is like inherently part of our connection and how we sort of really feel joy. And in some ways bastardizing that. Right. So again, we have to think about how do we use sort of what is inherently part of our well-being, the way we find joy, and if they're using now to put sort of what could be really harmful lyrics and information, it means that you're kind of bastardizing what makes us really beautiful, resilient groups of people. So that so it's something we have to all think about. We have to hold that stuff accountable.
yeah, yeah. And we're
Yes,
almost gonna get out here. So last comment,
yes.
on the radio says there was a recent study showing that there's a 10% increase on life expectancy for Black people who have Black healthcare providers.
Yeah. But that's, I mean, that is literally, that is, it's probably higher than that. I bet you if we looked at a lot of the studies, right? We already know, right, whether it's the maternal mortality morbidity issue or even the infant mortality morbidity issue, we already know that if your healthcare provider has at least the shared cultural connection and concordance with you, they're more likely to listen to you. They know the
Right.
statistics. They know all these things already. So they're gonna bring their personal and professional sort of information expertise to
Mhm.
the situation, right? They see you as a human first
Right.
and foremost, right? And if you think about it, a lot of those who are not black, who don't understand black people, don't see you. They don't even listen to what you're saying. Oh, my stomach hurts, so I have a pain here. They don't give you the extra test as needed, right? We see this often play out in so many ways. So it's not surprising. And this is why we continue to call for more medical doctors in the field. But that also requires the high school education to change. It requires medical schools to change. The cost of going to medical school is so astronomical. And black people don't got no wealth to pay for this. Right? So there's a whole compounding factor that's going to help us, that's going to be needed to ensure that we increase the number of healthcare providers that are black, right? And
Mhm.
again, this is not surprising, but we know there's a whole set of reasons why. But yes,
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Yeah. And the other thing is like some ways that I know that they're trying to combat is to throw money in it. So we know that there have been there's funding that has become available to actually address the Black maternal health issue or crisis that that's being acknowledged because it's not new. Let's be honest, it's not new.
That's
That's
right.
being acknowledged now. So there's money being thrown at it. So there's funding out there, like, for people to address. And people have, like, really getting people more educated on doulas and midwifery,
That's right. Yes.
kind of coming out of that institutional setting and being more
Yeah.
home and family
That's
centered.
right.
So those
Right.
are some really
That's
awesome
right.
that things are happening. Um, I had another thought about the mental health and it literally just exited my brain.
Got it. Got it.
It was I remember. It was about kind of going back to the, like the mental how that racism affecting children, how it translates to even how we deal with healthcare overall or in general, and the trust issues. I also was thinking like how we also do it to ourselves. How many times is it like, well, I'm not going to the doctor. So it's coupled with the trust, but also I'll
Yeah.
figure it out. I'll do it.
Yeah.
I'll do it on my own. So we also start to take on like it's okay. I'm okay. I can fix
Yeah.
it.
That's right. The superwoman syndrome that we know all of us have been sort of told, do it, just get up and go, put on your bootstraps and go. And again, again, when it has been, again, I would say in the end of it, yes, we're making a choice, but we know we're being forced to make a choice in many instances, right? That we're being told, you don't bother because even if you go, they're not going to see you. So I think yes, while it's up to us, we also have to recognize that we have been harmed and traumatized in many ways. And sometimes that decision making and choice is out of our hands. And so it's important that as a community, we continue to sort of implore that our people, if they need mental health practitioners or providers, we
Mm,
make sure that there's no stigma to that. If they need a doctor, that there's no stigma. Help somebody find the right doctors. Because I know plenty of black men who try to go to a doctor and they're literally either turned away or not listened to, right? So again, and they're like, where am I gonna go when they literally don't listen to me, right? And so when you
right.
keep getting the message that you don't matter, are you going to continue to put yourself in that space? And so it is important that, yes, we take some responsibility, but we have to continue to push the system that is inherently racist, that is also inherently sexist, to listen to us, listen to our people, no matter what. And we have, as a community and a village, need to create the spaces for us to be able to do that, right? Whether it's creating our own clinics, creating our own, make sure our own sort of, like professional sort of apprenticeship. We need to continue to do that starting pretty young. We need to create those spaces, because at the
Mhm.
end of it, if a doctor doesn't want to see you or diagnose you properly, you go and you just wasted your time, right? So we need to make sure that we don't just blame ourselves, but also blame the system and the institutions that continue to actually harm us in many, many ways, seen and unseen.
Yeah, yeah. You made me think about like even rural spaces.
Oh my God.
We know
Yeah.
overall like people who
Yeah.
live in rural health,
Oh
regardless
my
of
God.
what
Yes.
ethnic
Oh my
group
God. Yes.
you identify with, like rural health. But when if you are,
Oh my God. Yes.
melanin dominant, like it's like
Yes.
magnified.
Oh my
Like
God, it's magnified. It's a different. Oh my gosh, it's different. And there's people always think rural is white. I mean, look in the Carolinas, in Georgia. There's a whole black belt, they call it, right, of just black
right,
people living in destitute, living
rural
really
area.
away from resources. So we can't
Hmm.
ignore our black people, not just in urban, but exactly in rural communities where
Yeah.
they're often left behind and forgotten. So I could not agree with you more.
Yeah, yeah. So on that note, thank you so
Oh,
much, Dr. Iruka, for
thank
joining
you. Yes,
me. Everything you shared was so valuable. Thank you so much.
thank
And
you.
we will
Thank
we'll
you.
put Dr. Iruka's information if you have further questions about the research or the research and the work that she's doing and the collaborative that she's working on or with. That information will be in the description box on YouTube. So for those of you who are listening, who's catching this
Yes,
podcast later and you're listening, definitely visit the True Health Live YouTube channel so you can get more information. And it'll also be on the webpage because when we put the information about the podcast. So the recording will be up tomorrow. Thank you for all of you who
yes,
joined. Give thanks
yes.
to y'all on the radio, Master Manulex of the House of Smith, Sovereign Eads, and I think that's it. Thank you so much for all of your questions
Yes.
and really engaging. It was really, really great. And also, as always, if you have more, like please definitely like, share, and subscribe. Engage in the comments in the chat because I'll always, get to the comments and respond. And if it's not for me, I can forward it to Dr. Ruka to say, like, hey, this was in the
Yes.
comments and try to
Yes.
get the answer. Thank you so much for joining, and we will see you in 2 weeks where we'll be talking about more on, it's True Health Live. So we're, our Black mental health series is always continuing. But the next time we join each other, we'll be talking about Alzheimer's and dementia and caring for loved ones who are experiencing that and how families go through that. So thank you so much for watching and peace. We'll see you all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.